Thank you all for joining in, and we'll get started. So my name is Ben. I work part-time for Mountaineering Scotland as the Mountain Safety Advisor, and I work alongside Heather Morning, who's the Mountain Safety Advisor also. So tonight's talk is kind of going to be a broad brushstroke of looking at mountain safety, specifically for the mountain environment in winter. Now, that's not to say that some of the skills and ideas and what we do in the winter, it doesn't transfer to the summer as well, but we'll just look at some of the specific differences for the winter environment. So, who are Mountaineering Scotland, if you're not familiar with them? So, just to let you know that we are a governing body for climbers, mountaineers, skiers, and hill walkers, both in the summer and the winter. We are a national representative, and we campaign on behalf of the members for the mountaineering community on issues such as access, landscape, and mountain safety, and becoming access to courses, and it also helps to support our ongoing campaign to be able to promote everything for our members. So if you're not already a member, it's something that's worthwhile considering, and it gets you discount in shops as well if you need to pick up any goodies and bits and pieces of gear and kit. And it also gets you access to the courses that we do throughout the summer and the winter, and these are heavily subsidized, so they're cheap as chips, and they're really worthwhile courses that cover everything from avalanche awareness to summer navigation to night navigation, first aid. So there's a real broad range of things that we do. So I'm going to ask a wee question via one of the poll surveys here, and just want to find out, who is a member and who's not a member. So I'm going to do my best to launch this poll, and you can just click yes or no if you're a member or not. So it's not too bad, kind of a bit of an even split, 60% no, 40% yes. So that's great. I'm just going to end that poll. Thanks very much for doing that. I'll just share the results so people can see if you're interested. So we'll move on with the talk. So, sorry, just give me 1 second. My computer has froze. Apologies, my computer has frozen. Just give me one moment and we can move on. There we go. So the winter environment, it's a beautiful, wonderful landscape that we have here in Scotland and throughout the UK, that whenever the hills get this beautiful dusting of snow, they just look totally different and spectacular in their own way. And it has a sense of kind of longing for us to want to go there out of curiosity, and we're lured into this environment that just looks so beautiful and stunning. I think it's only human nature that we want to go and explore and see what's out there, because we've got this nice clean new snow that's kind of lying on the mountains. And you can see in these photographs, they look really quite pleasant. It looks like a fantastic place to be on a nice sunny day. More often than not, it kind of looks like this, kind of whiteout conditions. You're battling against the elements. But you can see in this photo here that people look quite comfortable, they're well dressed and somewhat prepared to be in that environment. So tonight is going to look at how we can ready ourselves to head out into this winter environment, and thinking about certain considerations along the way to stay safe. So in general, life is pretty risky, whatever we do, especially if we decide to go out into the mountains in the summertime. You know, we're always exposing ourselves to hazards that are in the mountain, and putting ourselves at risk. So it's so what we need to do is look at how we can reduce those risks whenever we're out in the mountains. And I just want to share a wee video with you about risk. Pretty scary stuff. You know, every time I watch that, my heart races a little bit. So you can see this base jumper has taken a really big risk, but his skill, his knowledge of what he does, and the experiences that he has to do that has helped him to calculate the risks in such a way that he can reduce the consequences of failure, so that he can then actually perform that activity to the most safest way possible. And it's all about planning and making good, consistently safe decisions to then actually make sure he's doing that right and not failing on it. So like I said, whenever we go out into the mountains, whether it's the summer or specifically looking at tonight's talk about the winter environment, what we need to do is, you know, make consistently good decisions in order to stay safe. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey tonight, looking at how we would go about trying to plan a day out in the mountains in the winter. And I'm just going to use the very simple approach of the Think Winter campaign that we have launched a number of years ago. And it's a very basic process of how to plan your trip, the considerations that you need to think about, and then being prepared to do the journey that you've planned, and then the things that you need to think about to stay safe in the winter environment. So another bit of a question for you here is, whenever you plan your journey or plan a day in the mountains, how much effort do you think you would put into it? So I haven't got this in a poll, but just have a think to yourself, how much would you do? Would you put 10% effort in, 20%? Just have a wee moment to think. So for me, I would say somewhere around 75% is the minimum effort to put in the time to plan a journey. And this can be done in the comfort of your own home with a cup of tea or coffee in your hand, looking at lots of little bits and pieces to then paint a nice, colorful, positive picture for a journey that you want to go and do in the mountains. So we're going to start looking at how we would plan our journey effectively. So the first thing we maybe look at is, where do we get the information to look at where we want to go? Are we wanting to climb a particular Munro, a particular Corbett? Is there somewhere in the mountain region that we live that we've never been to before that we want to explore a little bit more? So there's lots of useful online resources and books that give us guidance as to where would be a good place to go. And they give us routes and options in there. So this is kind of the starting point, is looking where you're interested in going. Once you've got that idea of a couple of different places that you might be interested in, you need to look then at the weather for that area for the day that you have planned. So there are multiple weather forecast options out there. Some give a general broad overview, and then others are a little bit more mountain specific. So probably the two most common ones that we would use for the mountains would be the Mountain Weather Information Service. So you can see here in this this image, it'll give you a general overview of the conditions that are happening, but then it breaks it down into a little bit more detail, and it's generally given a forecast for around 900 meters, which is where Munros will be around that 900 meter mark. So it lets you know what the on the mountain weather is going to be like, rather than at sea level, which will be very, very different. So key bits of information that you maybe want to draw out from the weather forecast specifically for the winter will be the wind and how it feels on you, because the wind is a real deal breaker in winter, because it moves the snow around the mountainside and changes how we will plan our journey in relation to where the snow is and then where the potential risks are in terms of avalanche. So it's really important to pay attention to the wind and the wind speeds. And also how much visibility is there. That will hopefully make you think about, well, how good is my navigation? Is my navigation really up to scratch to be able to cope in poor visibility? Or is my navigation limited, that I maybe should only go out on a nice clear day? So it's important to spend that little bit of time picking out those key bits of information from the weather forecast and just get you to think and question, are these conditions appropriate for me to go out into the mountains? And the good thing about the Mountain Weather Information Service is it gives a good broad overview of a large mountain area. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper and get more specific weather information of a particular mountain, there's another really useful forecast. But on top of the Mountain Weather Information Service, they have weekly videos that give you a good indication as to what's happening throughout the week, and they're really, really useful to watch to just help paint a little bit of a more colourful picture for you. So another forecast would be the Met Office, and they would give mountain-specific forecasts as well. So you've got a whole range of areas that they cover. And again, they give good detail as to what the wind speeds and wind directions are doing at particular heights. So for example, you can see here at Glen level, quite low down, the wind speeds are fairly gentle. They don't really give much. But then once you start to get up the mountain a little bit higher, up towards Munro height, the wind speeds are significantly more. So to give a rough idea of how strong wind speeds are, a colleague of mine would always refer to wind speeds as every 10 miles an hour is a pint at the pub. So you can see here that you have 50-mile-an-hour winds. If you think that's 5 pints, that trying walking in a straight line with a rucksack in your back and boots and crampons, in the mountains might not be so easy. So thinking about how wind speeds can affect your ability in relation to having a pint is something useful to think about. The other really useful thing with the Met Office is they give you the freezing temperatures and temperatures at different altitudes as well for your intended day out wherever you may want to go. So again, you can see here at Glen level, it's maybe around 6 degrees. But then once you get up to 900 meters, it's getting on to 0 degrees. So it's pretty chilly. So if you start to question yourself, what do I need to bring with me to stay nice and warm and comfortable at that altitude? You might need to think, oh, I might need some extra gloves, or I might need a slightly warmer jacket just to prepare for those temperatures. So it's those little questions along the way that you need to answer when looking at the weather forecasts. And then again, it just gives you kind of the wind chill, what it actually would feel like on you. So you can see here at 900 meters, it said it was 0 degrees, but it may feel more like -8 with those wind speeds. So again, question yourself, what do you need to carry to stay comfortable and warm when it gets to, you know, being at that altitude with those winds? So now that we've kind of had a look at some of the weather forecast and the considerations that we need to look at for the weather, we need to look then at being prepared. We know where we want to go. We've seen the weather forecast for that area. Now we need to think about, what do I need to take with me to stay safe and look after myself whilst out on the mountain. So you can see in that video those conditions that these people are out in. The wind speeds are probably around 30 miles an hour there, so a very typical Scottish winter day. And the other thing that the video demonstrates is that these people look like, you know, they're comfortable in that environment. They've got big, good quality jackets on. You know, they've got the ski goggles on, their map and compasses are all folded nice and neatly, and they're not flapping around in the wind, and they can easily fit into a jacket pocket somewhere that's easily accessible for whenever they're navigating around the mountain. And they look comfortable, they look relaxed, they don't look panicked in any way. So, you know, it looks like they're prepared and happy to be in that environment. So we're going to look at, you know, where do we start to get ready to be comfortable in that environment in relation to what we wear. So whenever you go out into the mountains, and this is very personal choice, so it is, but as a general guide, we can look at this idea of having a suitable layering system of clothes that is going to help us to feel more comfortable in the winter environment. So we may think about starting off with having a base layer system, something that's close to the skin, that's going to help draw any sweat and moisture away from the body to help just sort of feel more comfortable. And again, this is very personal choice as to the layering system that you have. Now, you don't just head out into the hill looking like that with your tight base layers and off you go. You need a few more layers on top. So maybe think about having a mid layer, like some heavy duty trousers, could be soft shell trousers and a jacket, or just something else, just to help keep a little bit more warmth in and to help keep the wind off as well. And then when it gets a little bit more gnarly and a bit more full on, just like the video was demonstrating, we might need to think about having a waterproof outer layer that's really going to protect us from all those elements and just keep the wind off as well. And you can see here, my colleague Rob is very well dressed and looks ready to venture out into the mountains. So just something to think about specifically towards the base layers and the layering system that you have. Modern technology and loads of good quality fabrics nowadays are all synthetically made or have a combination of merino wool and things like that, which really do a good job at trapping heat in and help to control your body temperature, and they dry out super quick, which is really important in the winter time because you don't want to be sweating and to remain cold because your sweat and your moisture doesn't go anywhere. So I think it's really important to be aware of the downsides of cotton in winter. It just soaks up all that moisture and will stay cold and just won't dry out. So if you're looking to think about the clothing system that you have, you know, synthetic clothes and combination of polyesters and merino are so much better than cotton. So I would avoid cotton and go with, good quality synthetic fabrics that are going to help keep you drier. So thinking about your layering system, a good layering system will really help regulate your body temperature. And again, it's a very personal choice. Find out what works for you, because what will work for me may not work for somebody else. And just something else to bear in mind, and especially in the Scottish winter, because it's a very cold and wet environment, if you're looking to buy big, heavy, warm jackets, a synthetic jacket is far superior than down, especially in the winter, because down will eventually, over time, just get wet and heavy, clump together, and will not do anything to keep you warm. Where synthetic jackets, they're designed to withstand sort of those kind of cold, wet environments, and will stay warmer for longer in relation to a similar down fabric in that environment. So I would strongly consider looking at something like that. And I'm not saying down is terrible, it's just better in certain drier environments, which Scotland generally isn't. Other considerations to think about with the clothes that you wear in the mountain: what color do you wear, and how is that going to make you be seen more if you should ever need to call upon mountain rescue or if somebody's looking for you? Bright colors are far better for the winter environment. In this picture, you can see that the light is very flat and very dull. So having a dark color in that low light is only going to make things harder to be seen. So bright colors are definitely the way forward. So moving on, thinking about what do we carry with us generally when we're out in the mountain environment to look after ourselves. And again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but you need to consider that you can't carry the kitchen sink, you can't carry everything with you, but you need to think about what is essential over what is a luxury in the environment that you're going out in. And this is just a kind of giving you a bit of a summary as to what I would sometimes carry, but not always, when I'm out in the mountains. So having a good quality rucksack, good boots, good waterproofs, a couple of spare gloves, hat, and a buff, and some sunglasses. And especially in winter, it's really important, I think, to have a head torch as well, because the days are generally shorter from end of November through December. If you're venturing out into the mountains, then having a head torch is really handy. And again, winter's really cold and wet, so being able to keep things dry is really good. So having dry bags to help compartmentalize everything and just keep all your stuff nice and dry, because your rucksack will only be so waterproof, and it'll start to then seep in. So there's a few things missing from this picture here, and that is the more essential winter equipment that we need to carry with us. And we'll look at kind of what is useful for us for the winter environment. So I think goggles are a brilliant bit of kit to buy, especially when it's really windy and you're trying to walk into a headwind and it's snowing and it feels like 1,000 needles are just flying at your eyeballs. So having a pair of good quality clear lens goggles will just help you feel that little bit more protected and more comfortable. And you can see this is Heather here out for a nice ski tour, looking very happy with her ski goggles on. Boots are again, a personal choice as to what style of boot you get, but in general, in winter, you want a stiffer soled boot that is going to be able to help you move around the mountain more comfortably. Having a really flexible boot will work, but will only get you so far. You want something that is rigid to help sort of kick into the snow, cut steps, and just feel a little bit more secure in your feet. Now you can get something as very aggressive as these boots. They're classed as a B3, very technical, very full-on climbing boot, where you can then look to get a more general winter mountaineering boot that has a little bit of flex and give, a little bit more comfortable for long days, and again, probably that little bit lighter as well. So you've got your B3 and your B2 boots, and it's always recommended to go for a sort of B2 mountaineering boot. Now with that comes the compatibility of crampons. So B for boot, C for crampons. So the B3 boots would sort of accommodate then a C3 crampon, again, which are fairly aggressive, more for mixed climbing or ice climbing or something very technical, where your general mountaineering crampons, your sort of C2 crampons, are then compatible with those B2 boots. So it's a good kind of combo to have for general mountaineering and sort of into easier climbing. What's this one? Very odd looking crampon with those kind of little bits of shoelace in between. And they're more aimed at sort of ski touring, very lightweight, foldable, collapsible. And again, it's something that's a very niche specific type of crampon that probably wouldn't suit your everyday general mountaineering. So if you're ever looking for something that's good for your overall, something like your C2 is kind of what you're looking for. So down to the lower end of the scale, you can look at your B1, which would be more 3-season, stepping into winter, a little bit more flexibility about them, but you can still buy a C1 crampon that will accommodate that and will get you around the mountain, in most cases for just general walking. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more winter mountaineering based, again, it's that B2 and C2 crampon compatibility that you're after, really. What about these things? Micro spikes. I would say that they're great for forest trails and tracks and walking around the streets if they're really icy. But in the Scottish winter, up the mountains, I would say that they're not great for being up high in the mountains. They have a very limited use, a very niche market for being low level, but high mountains, I would recommend not sort of purchasing them thinking that they're crampons. And I don't know if you saw a while ago, one of the mountain rescue teams, Air Mountain Rescue, actually had a call out to assist 2 walkers who were a little bit lost and just needed help getting off the mountains. And if you look carefully at this person's feet, they are wearing the micro spikes. And if you look at the team around them, the rescue team have got winter mountaineering boots and ice axe. So that's a bit more suited to the environment up high. So I would suggest micro spikes and things like that, not for the Scottish winter environment in the mountains. So moving on, you need another tool for moving around the mountains. So a ice axe, and you can see here we've got very specific ones for specific jobs. Something quite aggressive for climbing, and then really lightweight, almost like a toffee hammer for ski touring. They just fit into your bag, and they're very lightweight. But as a good mountaineering axe, a good general, sturdy, robust axe is kind of a mountaineering axe that would be ideal for everything. Up to a certain point, for climbing, you want something a bit more aggressive, but the mountaineering ones for general moving around the mountain is kind of ideal, really. Something else to maybe consider that you would not always carry, but it's a consideration, is a snow shovel. Now, it might be one of those things that you carry that gives you a false sense of security, thinking that if you were to get caught out, you think, oh, it's okay, I've got this shovel, I can dig into the snow, I can make an emergency shelter, I'm fine, I'm really safe. But it's one of those bits of kit that if you do carry, you hope that you never have to use it in that circumstance. But on the other side, they are very useful on a day that you just want to dig a little hole, just get in and just get out of the wind. Or if you were in the unfortunate event to witness an avalanche and you needed to try and assist in a rescue, then having a shovel is something that's worthwhile considering, but it's not something you always carry with you. It's just one of those optional extras. I think a really, really important piece of kit to carry with you is some form of emergency shelter, whether that's a group shelter, whether it's a 2 or 4-man one. Pack down really small. They're a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely a worthwhile investment, because once you get into them with somebody else, that feeling of being comfortable and warm is amazing, how quickly it changes your mentality. And even if someone was feeling a bit cold, or if you just wanted to get out of the wind and have your sandwiches, they're great pieces of kit to have. And having some form of bivy bag or emergency blanket, like the cheap orange ones that are about £5-6, you know, they're much better. You know, having a bag over a blanket. There was a story of a number of years ago of 2 people out in the mountains and got caught out overnight. One had a emergency bivy bag, the other didn't. The person with the bag survived, mind you. They were hypothermic, and the other one unfortunately lost their life due to hypothermia. But the little cheap bivy bag saved the person's life, and they're only about £5 or £6, and they can just live in the bottom of your bag. If you want something a little bit more expensive, you could look at blizzard bags, which is kind of like a very lightweight sleeping bag that is vacuum packed and weighs nothing. A little bit more expensive, but again, a worthwhile investment that just lives in the bottom of your rucksack. So strongly consider having something like this to just have in those emergency situations. So you go, something like the orange bivy bag, blizzard bag, and then your group shelter. So if you want to look and find out a little bit more info and in-depth knowledge about kind of what equipment to have for the winter environment, Mountaineering Scotland have just developed a couple of videos that you can get onto YouTube. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can watch these videos. And they're really useful, just give a little bit more knowledge and detail about what I've just talked about recently there. And then if you want to look at how you can go about using the boots and the crampons and the ice axe in a technical way, Glenmore Lodge YouTube channel has some fantastic videos that just help to demonstrate the key techniques whilst out in the winter environment as well. So I would recommend looking into them as well. Now, just because we've got all that equipment doesn't mean that we're protected from the mountains and everything that's out there. We need to think carefully. You know, just like this little mouse here, even though he's got that helmet on, doesn't protect him from the danger and the risk that is in front of him. We need to have that same mentality. We need to realize that even though we've got all that equipment, it doesn't protect us from the hazards out there. So again, it's thinking about how we can stay safe through careful planning, making consistently good decisions, and having a little bit more knowledge about the environment that we go out into to then be able to reduce the risks and reduce our exposure to those hazards. So that's what we're going to move on to now. We're going to look at how we go about staying safe in the winter environment. So I'm going to bring up another poll question for everyone to have an answer. So just bear with me 1 second. So here is a question on snow knowledge. How we read through that? I'll give you a minute to read through that and answer. great. I'll just give you another few wee seconds just to finish answering that poll there. Great, I'll just end the poll and then we can share the results, everyone can see. So that's good. Some people have got a good basic awareness, which is, it's always good, but it's good to sort of be able to look at how we can better that knowledge. Great, let's close that. Okay, so we're going to look at, sorry, my computer's just froze again. Let me just give it a 1 wee minute. So we're going to look at kind of a little bit of basic knowledge on avalanches themselves and how they happen. So my computer's just taking 1 wee moment to think about things. There we go. Okay, so in the winter, we've got beautiful scenery that changes very quickly, and that's due to the weather and the wind that we get in the winter environment. And you can see here these skiers are struggling to make their way into a headwind, and it looks like in the picture there's lots of snow being moved around, it's being blown about. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about, whether we go out on a nice sunny day as walkers, skiers, or even getting access to climbs as well. We need to think about what is happening to the snow and how we can avoid any potential dangers that are present to us. So if you can see in this picture here, it shows a avalanche having taken place. And basically an avalanche is a massive snow moving down a hill in the most basic of senses. That's what it is. It has to start from a particular place and it has to move or run down the hill, and then it has to stop somewhere. And that's the basic kind of understanding of what an avalanche is. But there's a little bit more detail that we're going to go into. And you can see this avalanche is quite a substantial size over a large slope. And you can see all the debris sitting at the bottom. But if you notice as well, it's on the surface. There's still more snow lying underneath that. But they can be much bigger than that as well. So this example here, this is Cairngorm in the Cairngorms. And you can see where it started from and where it has run down the mountain and where it has stopped. So it's quite a big debris field of snow, and it's gone full depth right down to the ground. So it can be quite big. And just to give you a scale of how big some of those lumps of snow are, they're pretty big. So yeah, avalanches in Scotland can be big. So it's, yeah, you don't want to get caught up in those things. So we need to look at how we can avoid, being in those areas and those types of terrain. So what causes an avalanche? How does it happen? We need 3 ingredients for an avalanche to happen. And that is weak or unstable snow. And that could be within layers of snow. There could be some form of weakness in the snow somewhere. We need avalanche terrain. And that's anywhere where the snow will start, run down the hill and stop. Okay, just like the picture showed in the previous slide. And then the third thing that we need is some form of trigger, whether that's us as mountain travelers or just more snow on top of what's already there, an extra weight, just waiting for it to actually give way and slide down the hill. So just looking at other avalanche terrain and the hazards that are presented to us along with avalanches. It's not just avalanches that are a hazard, it's how they present hazards to us based on the environment that we're in. So, for example, you could have a valley that's large or small scale. For example, the Calamine Gap in the Cairngorms, it's a small scale valley, and it could potentially funnel snow down into the bottom of it. A number of years ago, there was a large avalanche in there, and a number of people unfortunately lost their lives from being caught in the avalanche in there. You can have steep cliffs and drop-offs, depending on where you are in the environment. You could have an avalanche that's triggered above you and potentially push you off over a steep drop. You'd have run-out zones, which are basically the bottom end of where an avalanche may stop. So you could be standing at the bottom and again in the path of an avalanche. You can have complex terrain, which is a mix of trees and boulders and steep little undulations, depending on where you are in that, and where there's a lot of snow and a potential avalanche path above you. It's just these considerations that you need to think about. And then along with that, we have other associated hazards that the winter will present to us. So we have, for example, cornices, which is a wind-blown feature over a steep edge of a mountain, and it creates this false ground that you could think that is real ground, but is actually very weak and just waiting to fall down the mountain once you step on it. And then other things we need to think about in terms of what is a potential hazardous place to be are the convexities of a slope where there's going to be a high stress because gravity wants to pull the snow apart. And if you're standing at that point, you could just be like the trigger of a gun, and it could just then break away because there's an additional load that could cause the snow just to break up and fracture and slide down the mountain. So, quiz time. Avalanches happen on particular angles. There's a bit of a range of angles that they're most common in. Okay, so my question is, what are they? And I'm going to do another poll for you to answer. Oh, sorry, wrong poll. This one. Apologies about that. Great, I think most of you have answered that. Great, and we'll share the results. So most of you have got it right, so well done. That's really good. So yeah, the most common range for avalanches to actually occur in is around 30 to 45. Now that's not to say that they don't occur on, somewhere between 20 and 25, they just become less frequent. And then once you get above 45, they do happen, but are just less frequent. It's that range, 30 to 45, is kind of the ideal range for avalanches to be most common. The second part of the question is, if you were to pick one particular angle, what would it be is the prime angle for an avalanche to actually happen? There you go. So between 30 and 45, with the prime angle being around 37, give or take a degree. Some people say it's around 38, but it's that very narrow margin of around 37. Most of the slopes that we maybe want to actually venture onto are between 30 and 45. Think of 45 as probably one of the steepest ski runs that you would do, maybe something like Flypaper in the Glencoe ski resort. It's pretty steep, so something like that is around 45. Most of the slopes we would be are venturing onto are somewhere between 30 and 45. So this idea of a weak layer of snow, I just wanted to share a wee analogy with you just to give you a picture of what I mean, is that if you consider this nice sponge cake as some snow, you could have some firm or older snow that's fallen and then has compacted or has changed. It's a little bit more moisture and then it's frozen and it's become really firm and icy. You could then have the wind blow more snow on top of that, creating a bit of a weak or unstable layer that's just resting carefully on top of what's already there. And then you could have more snow deposited on top of that again. So then you've got this kind of this sandwich effect going on. But on the flat ground, absolutely fine. There doesn't really seem to be any danger to this sponge cake falling or sliding. But then all of a sudden, if we stick that sponge cake on a particular angle, say somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees, all of a sudden that top layer can only hold on for so long, and eventually what might happen is it's going to give way, whether or not that is naturally or if it's someone like us who wants to go in the mountains, stands there and causes the snow to give way. So thinking about the different scale and severity of avalanches and how they're sort of classified, we could look at it in this sense that there are different hazard levels from low to very high. Historically in Scotland, there's never really been very high, so it really only goes from low to high. And in each scale, it will give a bit of a description as to the size of the avalanche and some advice to us as mountain travelers as the best way to deal with that environment. So looking at it in a simplistic way, we could think that if on a avalanche forecast, which we'll look at shortly, if it's a low forecast, generally travel conditions in the mountains are safer. The avalanche size might be a small to medium in very isolated areas, and then it might take a large group of people in a particular place to cause an avalanche to actually happen. If it's a moderate avalanche danger, you might start to see that human-triggered avalanches are possible, and you're starting to then reduce the amount of safe areas that you can travel because maybe there's more moderate danger spread throughout the mountain, starting to limit where you can travel. And then that even is exacerbated then on a considerable avalanche forecast day, that you can see there that all of a sudden human-triggered avalanches are possible, to then natural avalanches may occur, sometimes large, and then a single person load is most likely going to trigger an avalanche. So it's really important to be mindful and aware of how you plan your journey if you get avalanche forecasts that are in this considerable bracket. And then on days when it's high, just don't bother. I wouldn't even entertain the idea of going out into the mountains, because where you can safely travel is like virtually non-existent, and you have to think really hard about how you can move around that mountainside safely. And if you're really having to work your brain to be in that environment, I would just don't bother. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things to stay well away from. So another poll question for you is, what percentage of victims trigger their own avalanche? I'm going to share a poll question with you. I'm not sure if this poll is working. Let me have another go. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just give you another wee minute just to finish off answering that, and then we can move on. Okay, just share the results quickly with everyone so you can see where you placed yourself. Okay, so I'm just going to give my computer just a wee minute just to kind of refresh itself, because it seems to freeze every time I've done one of those polls. So just give it a wee minute before I move on. Okay, hopefully it should be back up and running. There we go. 90% of victims trigger their own avalanche. So it's quite a high percentage. And we need to think about, if we're heading out into the mountains, there's a 90% chance of us being in the wrong place at the wrong time if we don't make the right decisions. So something to think about, that if we play a role in causing avalanches, you know, we can have a role in avoiding them. And that is, like I was saying earlier, about making good decisions when we're out in the mountain environment. And just to give you a bit of a statistic from the winter of 2017 and 2018, out of the 30 avalanches that were triggered, 19 were triggered on a considerable forecast. You know, so that's maybe suggestive of people willing to take more risks, or maybe not doing enough planning, or maybe just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we need to think about how can we then reduce those statistics and actually, you know, not be getting involved in avalanches. So we're going to look at the Scottish Avalanche Information Service, which is our go-to website to find the forecasts of the areas within Scotland that we can then look at where the avalanche risks are presented to us. So the Avalanche Forecast, if you don't know, it was developed by the Snow and Avalanche Foundation of Scotland. It's a very simple framework in helping us make good informed decisions. So if you were to go onto the website and you look at a particular forecast, I've just nabbed this one from the Northern Cairngorms. It gives you your little rose diagram, pizza, your cookie, wheel of fortune, whatever you want to call it. It's just a representation of a mountain in a particular area. It's just a 2D image. And then along with that, you have all the writing as well, which gives you in-depth, detailed descriptions of what is happening out in the mountain and what has been observed in relation to what the snow stability is like. So like I was saying earlier, wind is a big factor in the winter environment. It will move the snow around the mountains from one location to the other. And that's what the avalanche rose diagram will show you. It will show you where the snow has been moved onto the mountainside and where therefore the higher level of risk is on that aspect of the mountain. So looking specifically just at the rose diagram, it only really tells you 2 bits of information, which is quite limited, and that is the aspect of the mountain that there could be a moderate, considerable, or a low risk, and it tells you at the altitude that it is also present on that mountainside. Now, those numbers will always change on the outer two rings depending on how far down the snow has been blown on the mountain, but the number in the middle will always be of the highest mountain in that region. So in this case, it's Ben Macdui in the Northern Cairngorms. So the Avalanche website, they can look at statistically how long people observe and look at the forecast. And I think there was a while back they had seen that maybe on average, people were only looking at the website for about 30 seconds. And I think they had realized that people are only looking at this diagram and maybe then planning a day in the mountains based on this Wheel of Fortune, which really only tells you 2 bits of information. It only really tells you where the problems are on the mountain, at what aspect and what altitude, but it doesn't tell you what the hazards are on the mountain. That's why it's really important whenever you look at an avalanche forecast, you read the writing and look at the detail within the forecast, because it's going to tell you about the snow stability, whether if it's well bonded, if it's weak bonded, if it's what type of snow it is, if it's wind slab, you know, where it's wind blown snow, it sounds quite squeaky underfoot when you walk on it, you know, and whereabouts it's going to be lying and how it is in relation to you. So it's really important to pay close attention to that writing and try and put them together to paint a nice picture for you to then look at where you can avoid those dangers. So some questions which I think are really useful for us to answer whilst we're looking at the avalanche forecast is, what are the problems? Because if you look at the observed avalanche forecast, you know, it's people who've gone out and walked around the mountain and have then relayed that information to us, telling us what's happening out there. We need to think about where those problems are and then how we can plan our day to avoid those areas. We need to think about the likelihood and the probability of an avalanche occurring. So if it's a low, moderate, considerable risk, you know, is that something we want to gamble with our lives, you know, going out at considerable risk? And then the scale and the size of the problem, is it widespread or localized? And that is, again, is looking at the detail. They will be able to tell you if there's localized or isolated areas where you might find considerable or moderate risks on the mountainside. So it's always worth questioning, you know, what's going on, where can I see these problems? So maybe just a bit of a visualization for you to then actually relay that information onto a map. So you can see here I've got just a screenshot of Cairngorm Ordnance Survey map with a avalanche diagram just in the bottom corner. And it's showing me that there are moderate and considerable risks on east and west facing aspects, and then a considerable risk on northwest and northeast slopes above 950 meters. So below 950 meters, it's a low risk. So that green squiggly snake is sort of, you could say that's around that 900 meter mark. So you could think anything below that would be of a low risk. Once you start to travel on your journey up towards that sort of green snake, you can start to then think, right, well, where are these moderate risks in relation to me? And you can start to think, well, westerly aspects, it was moderate. So that slope there might be a risk for me, so I can avoid that. There's another moderate risk because it's facing to the west as well. These easterly aspects are also of a moderate risk. And then there's a few areas where we can start to paint a picture of where the considerable risks are. And you can now start to see that it's reducing areas that you would want to visit. So you can question yourself, well, where are they safe places to go? And think about ridge lines. Ridges or bridges, generally the wind will whip across and move the snow off ridges and expose them and potentially make them a safer area of travel, as this picture shows the ridge line there, this one, or that one there. So it's a really useful thing to do in your planning, to spend some time looking at a map and looking at the avalanche forecast and where those risks are in relation to the mountain, and then how you can plan your journey accordingly to avoid those hazards. Further information that you can gather then is the Scottish Avalanche information blogs. The forecasters will go out into the different areas and will take a few photographs and write a little blurb about how they observed what the snow was doing under their feet, whether it was hard going, stormy, or if it was very wet. So again, it's really useful, clear, fact-based information. So again, yeah, it's all about gathering information to then paint that colourful picture for you, then manage your safety in the mountains. So here's a bit of a question for you. I have mentioned certain things, 3 A's of avalanche terrain, and I'm going to have you just have a wee think about what they are, if you can remember back to the avalanche forecast, and we're going to answer them in a wee second. So these are 3 really useful questions to continually ask yourself in your planning and whilst you're on a journey in the mountain. Okay, so questions are coming up on the next slide, or answers, sorry. The aspect, so that could refer to any slope that is facing a particular direction on your compass, whether it's north, south, east, or west. The altitude, at what height on the avalanche diagram are the dangers? You know, where are they? And 300, 400, 500 meters. And then the angle, what is the particular angle that the avalanche could happen? So if you think about these 3 things continually in your planning and on your journey, it really will help you paint a picture of where to avoid whilst you're on your travels in the mountain. And then utilizing those 3 questions along with your avalanche forecast. Now, the particular thing with angle is, how do you know, looking at a map, what particular angle of slope is? So there's a really useful rule of thumb that you can follow that will help make it a little bit clearer of where on a map a 30-degree slope is. And that is this notion of missing contours. So generally on an Ordnance Survey map, you'll have your index contours with 4 thinner, skinnier lines in between, which will mark your vertical height of 10 meters. But then what happens is cartographers will have to squeeze those index contours closer and closer together to indicate steepness. But then they'll get to a point where they can't put all of them in, so they have to actually miss out or exclude a contour. And whenever that happens, as a general rule of thumb, that is about a 30-degree slope. And you can measure that using the edge of your compass. So if it's 2 millimeters between the thick brown index contours, it's about 30-degree slopes. And statistically, most accidents, whether it's in the summer or the winter, happen where there's missing contours on the maps. And just to put that into a bit of context for you, looking back at a previous slide, you can see this avalanche that has happened. This is, again, looking back into Corrian Loughin. So you can see that slope that the avalanche has actually happened. So if you look carefully at that slope, which is the screenshot of this Ordnance Survey map, if you look very carefully, you actually have a few places where there are missing contours, but the contours are also getting very close together to be excluded. And that is the slope that the avalanche in the picture has actually happened. So it kind of puts it into a little bit of context for you, that showing you that it's about a 30-degree slope that that avalanche has happened on. So I just want to go through some kind of things to think about whilst you're out on your journey. You know, there's little signs that the mountain is going to be telling you whether or not it's a good idea to be there, or if you need to alter and change your plans. So some of these red flags could be recent avalanche activity. If you go out into the mountains and you see lumps of snow, it's kind of broken apart and it's all around the mountain, It's saying that there's been a change in temperature or something has happened and there's been recent activity, which is probably a telltale sign to say that there could be more happening. So you might not want to actually be there. Cracking or collapsing snow underneath your feet or your skis. If you see these shooting cracks disappearing, it's generally referred to as propagation. It's just the mountain's way of telling you that the snow is really weak and unstable, and you might not actually want to be there, and you might need to turn tail and run. If you find yourself in a position like this, there's no real hard and fast answer as to what to do. It's just hope that it doesn't actually avalanche, because it's just telling you that it's about to. So if you're seeing these signs lower down earlier on in your journey, then you could start to presume that if that slope is a east-facing slope, higher up, east-facing slopes could be at greater risk, so you might want to avoid them, on your journey. So rapid temperature increases, such as rain, just puts more pressure into the snow. So example, cornices, if you get more moisture, more rain into that snow, it just makes it heavier and heavier and heavier, and then it just wants to collapse. You could be standing at the bottom of a slope with a cornice above that hits the snow, and then it could avalanche and you're in the run-out zone. So again, considering those things that are happening, like we've been having recently, it's been really warm, lots of increased temperature, and lots of rain on the mountains. Heavier drifting snow, a general rule of thumb that's really good to follow, that if there's a big storm event and lots of snow has been dumped on the mountains, leave it a couple of days, let everything settle. Don't go out into the mountains, because the avalanche risk can just be really, really high. And then rapid temperature increases around you. If you start to see on a nice sunny day, snow sloughing off or rolling down the hills, it's just a rapid change in temperature, which snow really doesn't like, and it's just increasing in instability and weakness. So these are little telltale signs or red flags of potential avalanche danger. So I've just basically covered a very basic process of planning, how to be prepared and stay safe. And this is what the Be Avalanche Aware process goes into in further detail. And it's a really good checklist to utilize throughout your planning whilst you're on your journey, to then have a consideration about what's happening around you as well. And it goes through 3 phases: planning your journey and key places, which is basically anywhere a decision needs to be made in the mountain if you need to then change or alter your journey. And through each of those phases, you need to think about the weather, which is the little snowflake, you and your party, and what skills you have, and whether or not those skills are the best to have for the environment you're in, and the landscape that you're going to. Is it new landscape? Is it complex terrain? Have you been there before? Those considerations. So you can download it as an app for your phone, and highly recommend using it. It's a great app, and it has some really other cool features and tools that you can use when you're actually outside. So again, just this idea of good decisions are based on asking relevant questions to yourself and to the group you may be with out in the mountains. So again, just to share some of these thoughts with you, is thinking about your 3 A's. Have you identified those 3 A's, and are you in avalanche terrain? What are the other associated hazards in the forecast that might present a problem to you for that day? How stable and strong is the snow? Have you put yourself into a potential hazard and expose yourself to those hazards, put yourself at risk? Are you in the avalanche terrain? And is there somebody else nearby in your proximity that could cause an avalanche on you? So it's these questions you need to think about whilst planning and being out on your journey. So if you want to go and visit, beautiful landscapes and go out into complex terrain, and you have an avalanche forecast that's such as this, that indicates a very high risk and limits your route choice and your planning, it might be best just to stay at home and not bother. Because the probability of success versus consequences of failure, you've got to think about that and what is your skill level to be in that environment? Can you cope with those conditions? If you can't answer that confidently, you might just want to wait for a day where it's low risk and that your skill is on par with the conditions that are presented to you, and you can manage that more comfortably and much more safely. And I think it's really important to have some form of laid-back procedure that you can then inform people of where you've gone to, who you're out with, and what time you expect to be back, and what to do in case of an emergency. I think it's something that we're all maybe culprits of not doing enough. I know I can put my hands up and say I don't do it enough, and I need to do it more often. So something to think about. So if it all goes wrong, who are you going to call? What are you going to do? So you call 999, then what? You ask for the police, then mountain rescue. And that's kind of the order you do things to be able to then get the mountain rescue. And then the mountain rescue are really good at being able to then help you to help them by asking relevant questions to where you are in the mountain and just help you stay calm and relaxed. If you haven't already, something worth considering is doing the emergency text service. All you need to do is send the word register, and it basically allows you to use your phone and text your location, using emergency services. If you're maybe a bit hard of hearing, or if your battery's a little bit low, it works really well for that. Technology is a wonderful, fantastic thing that will really help us in relocating ourselves in the mountain if it all goes a bit wrong, or being able to give emergency services our location. And there are a real great range of apps that we can use on our phones, such as OS Locate or View Ranger. It helps to give you mapping software, and it can, I use it all the time in the mountains as well, but I always take my map and compass with me as well, because the software is only as good as the battery life on whatever it is that you have. So they're worth looking into using and considering having that as a backup feature or a feature whenever you're navigating. And watches as well, great features to have for being able to navigate with, help give you your altitude, or actually has really good mapping software. Now, again, they are more expensive, but if you like that sort of thing, you can invest your money in having something that's going to aid in your navigating and being able to give someone your location if it all does go a wee bit wrong. At the end of the day, if you've done all your planning and the weather gods are just all against you and it's just not a good idea to be in the mountains, just stay at home and stick the kettle on. There's always another day, and the mountains will always be there. And that is it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me. And I'll now spend a wee bit of time looking at some of the questions that people have asked throughout the talk. And again, like I said, if I don't get the chance to answer them all, we can copy them and then put them onto our social media later on in the week. So I'll just scroll back up to the top, look at some of these questions. So somebody has asked about a PLB, which is a personal locator beacon. Are they a good idea? They're kind of a one-off use device that you can then go online and register information onto it. And then basically you pop the lid off, the wee aerial pops up, and then it just gives your specific location where you are. And it just basically then sends sends help there. You can get other devices that are a little bit more advanced, such like the Garmin InReach Mini, which you can then subscribe to, and you can send text messages with it, and somebody can then go online and look and track where you are if you know you're going to be somewhere where there's no phone signal. So it depends what you're doing, depends where you're going. They can be a very useful supplement to your navigation, and just peace of mind for somebody else if you're going somewhere for a long journey somewhere. So good question. So somebody's asked on advice on size of boots. Again, it's a very personal choice with what boots that you wear, because, for example, the company Scarpa versus La Sportiva will have different shapes for different sizes of feet. I think sometimes La Sportiva are a little bit narrower if you have a more low profile and narrower foot. Scarpa are maybe a little bit wider and accommodate slightly chunkier or fatter feet. Like myself, I go for Scarpa. But in terms of size, it's just trial and error. Go into shops, spend the time looking at what works for you. So another good question here is, how do you measure for the right ice axe? Basically, if you were to stand up and have an ice axe in any hand and just have it relaxed down the length of your leg, the spike of the axe should come to the top of your walking boot. And then if you were to hold it across your body, if you were doing an ice axe arrest, it should sort of be comfortably across your body. Your arms don't want to be really high, just sort of tucked in like a boxer in a ring, just comfortable. So that's a good way to measure an ice axe. So another good question is, are there good beginner hills that you would recommend? Yeah, so depending on where you live, you want to find hills that are maybe a little bit lower level, a bit more roly-poly, not complicated terrain, ones that are close proximity to a road or somewhere people live, and you can easily get down very quickly to then get to a roadside. So somewhere like the Pentlands or the Ochils or the Campsie Fells are really good hills to start off with in practicing your navigation, because they can present some pretty bad weather at times. And then, you know, if you feel a bit more confident to then go explore some bigger hills, easier hills that have quick access, like Cairngorm Mountain itself, you start up quite high from the car park already whenever the snow gates are open. And it's a fairly short distance up and down in a enclosed, safe area. So another good question, when and how close to a trip would you check the avalanche warnings? So if, for example, if you're going for a weekend, it's always good to look at the avalanche forecast, you know, the couple of days before, because you can see the history. If there's been consistent winds coming, for example, say from the east, all that snow is going to be somewhere on westerly slopes. So it's always good to look at the history a couple of days before, and then even the morning of, because the avalanche forecast is done for a 24-hour period, not just for one day. So if it's forecast at the end of the day for Friday, it's forecast for 6 o'clock on that day to 6 o'clock in the evening the next day. So it's a 24-hour period. So it's always good, yeah, look a couple of days ahead. So another question, thank you very much. What courses would you suggest for someone new to winter walking? So any of our courses that we run in Mountaineering Scotland, we run them for complete beginners who've never worn crampons on their feet before. And we start off either a one-day crash course or a two-day course. that if you do the first day, we recommend that you can then do the second day, which will then give you a little bit more time on your feet maneuvering around the mountain. Similarly, Glenmore Lodge will do the same. They have intro courses, whether it's a weekend or a midweek course that just starts from zero to then working your way up to become more of a independent, self-reliant person, to feel confident that they can then start to explore the winter. So it's worth looking on either our own website or some others like Glenmore Lodge. So someone's asked, why are clear lens goggles better? Clear lens goggles are better because you can actually see detail on maps if you're having to navigate, where filtered lens goggles sometimes make contour lines disappear and it's hard to see the brown on the contour on the map. And then if you're caught out at night time, being able to navigate at night without that hindrance of a filter in your lenses makes it much easier. So clear lens goggles work much better in the mountain environment. So I think I've got through all or most of the questions. If I've missed any, I do apologize. What we can do is we can take them all off and then we can answer them and then put them onto social media. But I would just like to say again, thank you very much for joining. I hope it was informative and just maybe a nice refresher for information that you already have, or you've picked up some new little bits and pieces of information. And I do hope that you continue to stay safe and that we look forward to being able to get back into the mountain environment soon as we progress into hopefully better stages of lockdown, that we can then start to travel and get out into those mountains again. But whatever we do, again, thank you and just stay safe. Bye now.